We're now going to begin our first panel. It's accountability at the intersection between Syria and Ukraine. And Sanjar Sohail is going to be moderating this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Distinguished guest and participant and panelists. My name is Sanjar Sohail. I'm an Afghan-Canadian journalist and publisher. I warmly welcome you to this first panel of this conference on justice and accountability. I would like also to thank Olga, coordinator of Syria and Ukraine Network, and Katinga Slavo for organizing this timely and important event. This panel is about accountability at the interaction between Syria and Ukraine. As you all are aware, the decades of geopolitical tensions are slowly making way to full-fledged military aggression, festering the world over, intensifying cold wars, and eating away at the rule-based international order. Violence is increasingly deployed against dissent in an escalating us versus them. Armed conflict have been proliferating at new peaks in terms of spread and violence since World War II, deployed purposefully against civilians and undermining international law. Human rights violations are on the rise, and the pursuit of responsibility to protect is but a lost cause. In this panel, we are going to discuss the state of the rule-based international order, the state of accountability of detainees, the kidnapped and the disappeared, and opportunities for cross-fertilization between the two contexts. In this panel, I am having a distinguished guest, Alexandra Matavichok, Director, Center for Civil Liberties and Nobel Peace Prize winner for 2022. Fadel Abdul Ghany, Executive Director, Syrian Network for Human Rights. Ambassador Stephen Rapp, Distinguished Fellow at the Hague Institute for Global Justice, former US Ambassador at Large for War Crimes. Ibrahim Olab, Chief Legal Counsel. He'll be virtual. And Mr. Evan Nelson, former Danish Special Representative for the Syria crisis. I would like to start with Ms. Alexandra Matavichok. She is having, I think, a video presentation for us, and then I go to other panelists.
You're thinking about things people in peaceful countries would never think about, like how to distinguish different types of shootings, or like where to hide if the rocket targets your city, for example. It's scary, especially when something is going on in your city and there is no way you can help or change the situation.
And so the signal has been sent by the inaction on Syria that people can get away with these crimes, and certainly that's
I think this is not the one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll go to my next panelist until they are prepared for the video presentation. Fadel Abdul Ghany, Executive Director, Syrian Network for Human Rights. The floor is yours. You have the opening remarks, and then we go for questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me and for the kind invitation. Thank you, Olga and Katinga, for your great job in organizing all of this. I have a report to present it, but I'll speak a little bit about our work and then highlight the topic. The Syrian Network for Human Rights have been monitoring and documenting the violation committed by the Russian forces since the beginning of their military intervention in Syria. These violations include killing, destruction, forced displacement, and targeting vital sinners. SNHR have archived this information in a dedicated database and has published 94 reports on these violations since September 2015. In these reports, SNHR detailed various patterns of violation carried out by Russian forces in Syria. According to our database, Russian forces are involved in violation, including war crimes, through their bombardment of approximately 1,246 attacks on vital civilians facilities, including 223 schools, 207 medical facilities, and 60 markets. Russian forces have also killed 6,954 civilians in Syria, including 2,046 children and 978 women. The Syrian and Russian forces have committed enormous violations of international law in Syria. Some of these violations, such as killing and forced displacement, have reached the limit of crimes against humanity. The Syrian and Russian regime passes the capability of the state, and they have harnessed significant resource to conduct ruthless and indiscriminate destructive attack. Due to the Syrian regime ability and to avoid and to evade accountability, it has been encouraged to escalate its violation, even it's to extend using internationally banned weapons such as cluster munition and chemical weapons. The primary resource behind the Syrian regime impunity is the Russian support, the use of its veto power in Security Council. Could you please present the report I shared with you? Thank you, sir. So the Russian has used its veto power 18 times since March 2011 to defend the Syrian regime and its violation, which has risen to war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this is one of our 94 reports. This we used to issue a report annually every 30th of September, the intervention of Russia in my country, Syria. And here is the chart showing when Russia used the vetoes, and we compare this of the killing in Syria, the killing scale, how it's dramatically increased because of the Russia veto, how support the impunity. Additionally, Russia opposite the expansion of the authority of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, in attributing responsibility for chemical attacks. However, due to the absence of veto power in OPCW, the organization authority was expanded. So here we can compare. The investigation and identification team, IIT, has in its three report published so far, provided evidence of the Syrian regime responsibility for carrying out 6 chemical weapons attacks. The second and the third report also established Russian forces support for the Syrian regime in executing 2 chemical weapons attacks, which were that attacks on city of Saraqib, February 2018, and the attack on the city of Douma in Damascus suburb on April 2018. When Russian military invaded Ukraine, it followed a similar pattern, and it had completely escaped punishment in Syria and didn't face any significant consequences for their unlawful intervention in Syria. The West didn't impose any sanction on Russia following to its military intervention in Syria, even after dozens of hospitals and vital centers were bombed. So zero sanction from the West on Russia due to their violations in Syria. Accountability is indivisible, and the Russian government has progressively violated international law from its invasion of Georgia 28 to annexation of Crimea 2014, and then military intervention in Syria 2015, and subsequently its invasion of Ukraine 2022. This privilege believed that some Western countries, actually there is a prevailing belief that some Western countries have been lenient with Russia, which includes a desire to involve Russia in more countries and regions, leading to an erosion of its capability. The Syrian regime also followed Russian footsteps by politically support it through all available means. It's vetoed against the General Assembly resolution to suspend Russian membership in Human Rights Council. In addition, it was one of very few countries represented at the United Nations that recognition the region of independence of Lugansk and Donetsk. Only Syrian regime, North Korea, 3 countries in all around the world. So he's like paying back what is Russia offered him. Here I'll present a little bit those maps showing how is the Russian intervention served the Assad regime in recapture lots of territories by Russian bombardment. And this chart actually showing how is the civilians killing in Syria due to the Russian intervention year after year. This is also distributed based on provinces. This is database, not an estimated figures at all. I don't want to take much time, but you can read the report itself. I want to jump to some successful point and cooperation. Past few days, in fighting accountability, in fighting impunity, and achieve little bit steps toward accountability. I am very proud that the prosecutor memorandum presented by the Netherlands and Canada to International Court of Justice to holding Syrian regime accountable for violation of the Convention Against Torture relied on the Syrian Network for Human Rights database and the Commission of Inquiry. Those are mainly the main source, and I think this legal action represents a significant step toward achieving accountability and justice in Syria. Today also I have a meeting with the Ukraine Prosecutor General for further coordination and cooperation. I brought a lot of evidence toward Russia crimes that presented in the report based on our database, Russian general, all of that showing also our cooperation toward fighting impunity in both of our countries. Jump to conclusion, I think that we need a special court establishment to investigate Russia crimes in Syria and Ukraine together and have this mandatory. And I think that effort should be made to weaken Bashar al-Assad, a key ally of Putin, and genuine progress should be made toward a political transition to democracy in Syria. Further sanctions should be imposed on Russia for its military intervention in Syria. And finally, the Syrian network for Human Rights are proud to be a founding member of the Syrian Ukraine Network to give a voice of the victims in Syria and Ukraine, and showing solidarity with the victims in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. If the video of Alexandra Matafichuk is ready? No, it's not? Okay. I'll go to Ambassador Stephen Rapp for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be back before you. I did want to discuss different ways in which Syrians and Ukrainians can be cooperative to further the cause of justice, and some of that has been mentioned by Fadel in his opening. You know, I really see sort of 4 different areas, and one of them I think is represented by this conference, but this needs to be emphasized time and time again, that the world and Ukrainians in particular, but the whole global system is facing the consequences of continued Russian impunity. Impunity breeds impunity, and Putin wouldn't have invaded with the full-scale invasion that happened last February and continued with this ongoing aggression and these horrible crimes across this country, were it not for the way that he got away with these crimes in supporting the Assad regime. And the importance of emphasizing an end to impunity and cooperating to that end, and the way in which we're seeing basically the same overarching crime, which is the oppression of a people. I like that comment about the responsibility. The Russians follow the responsibility to oppress rather than the responsibility to protect. But indeed it is that. It's the people that dare to stand up and to want to be independent, to have a democracy, to have a say and a decision in their own future. In Ukraine, in Aleppo, you know, the same kinds of things were happening in terms of the Russian conduct. And that's really, in my view, it can reach into genocide, but it is absolutely the crime against humanity of persecution based upon, you know, political belief. In this case, also nationality. There's an effort to destroy that group, destroy everyone that might dare to dream. And there's really that relationship, and we need to be pushing that overarching story of the need to cooperate. Talking to Sanjar earlier, it's important to understand that we have impunity in this situation. There are other situations of impunity in the world, such as Afghanistan, where we really haven't seen any action, even though there is ICC jurisdiction for the crimes committed by the Taliban, the crimes committed by ISK, and we really need to see it there as well. And we've talked as well about the situation in Iran. There are a number of these situations, and often these, like Iran supporting the war here, these things contribute to each other. And so that end to impunity, I think, is essential, because without it, as I said earlier in my comments, no one is safe in the world. Another key part of this is, I think, the relationship of civil society in this role. I mean, we've heard Fadel talk about the role that his organization, the Syrian Network for Human Rights, played in the case brought in the International Court of Justice for torture by Canada and the Netherlands. And other civil society organizations as well contributed to that, and contributed to the work of UN commissions and mechanisms that consolidated their work. And the same thing here, hearing the Truth Hounds, Alexandra's organizations, other organizations that are represented here, that fundamentally you need the civil society working with the victims and survivors and bringing forth their suffering, bringing forth their stories, finding the documents, et cetera, to enable even a situation where there are police and prosecutors, as there are here, and particularly in situations where there are not police and prosecutors. That's a second area. The third area is, and Fadel mentioned as well, the importance of having an international tribunal in the context of Ukraine and the crime of aggression. Because even while we have the ICC with jurisdiction, thanks to the declarations of 2014, 2015 by the government that essentially granted jurisdiction to the ICC even without joining the ICC, there is jurisdiction for the crime of of genocide, jurisdiction for the crimes against humanity, jurisdiction for the war crimes. And we've already seen, of course, the first arrest warrants issued on that basis. But because of the nature of the aggression amendments and the way in which they entered into force, there's no jurisdiction for the crime of aggression. And so we need an international tribunal to hold Russia responsible for that. That's not a crime that we've generally seen in the world. We don't see it in Syria. In Syria, of course, the crime is the Syrian government committing crimes against its own people, not a country next door. And most of the crimes that have been committed in the last 78 years since World War II have been crimes committed in internal armed conflicts, not in external ones. But this is certainly the example of the most massive crime committed in Europe, really since the invasions of 1939 and 1941. And if we don't enforce this norm now, it's hard to imagine when we will do it. As the world looked at Ukraine and their eye, scales fell from their eyes, the truly shocking thing on February 24th, 2022 was people going to school and to work and living their lives and taking care of their families and building their futures, and then suddenly there's death raining from the sky without ever doing anything to aggress against Russia. No self-defense on Russia's part. Suddenly you have this invasion, and it's important that we uphold that norm. At the same time, in the Syria context, we're continuing to work on ideas for having an international court for Syria. And it's particularly in the chemical weapons area where there's a real gap, because the whole chemical weapons organization has voted time and time again to take action against Russia, but the only thing they can do is basically, Russia, of course, supported Syria's chemical weapons use, but they've not been able, in the context of Syria, to do more than simply suspend Syria's vote in the conference of the Assembly of the parties to the Chemical Weapons Convention. It's important to establish a tribunal that would indeed enforce that. And the way to do that is for other states to essentially pool their jurisdiction and have that at least ratified and approved by the 193 countries or by a vote of the Conference of State Parties. There's a way to justice too. So in both situations, we need work to essentially fix the international system. And the same legal theories that are now being pushed by Ukraine on the aggression thing work in the Syrian context as well. And finally, I don't want to, we can talk about obviously the ICC case, we can talk about the cases by the Prosecutor General's office and the importance of moving those cases. Of course, those are situations in which there's no comparable opportunity in the Syrian context. But, and obviously, there are ways in which Syrians can contribute to those processes because of the same pattern of crimes, and particularly, as I say, the persecution is a crime against humanity. But there's also the third country cases, and that's where Syrians have had some justice, for instance, in Germany, with the conviction of Colonel Roslin, who was leading interrogation, torture, and murder in one of the detention facilities in Damascus. And there are other cases going forth on Syria. Many organizations are now working for the filing of similar cases in third countries. We have a joint investigative team that's working on it in The Hague. There are victims groups, particularly that are representing survivors of these crimes that are present in Germany and other countries. And we will soon see filings in those cases. And those efforts need to be coordinated, in particular to find fugitives. Talking to one of our Iranian friends, they mentioned the example of someone involved in the executions in 1988 who turned up several years ago on travel in Sweden. And he was arrested and eventually convicted of those crimes that happened 35 years ago. He was one of the retail executioners in the prison in Tehran. And he was convicted and sentenced to life. That seems like a long time to wait for justice. We don't want to wait that long, but we do need to develop a coordinated way to locate these fugitives that are traveling abroad and to get cooperation between states to bring them to court, maybe at the ICC, maybe back here, but also potentially in the courts of third countries. And I think there's tremendous opportunities, given the way that Syrians have opened that avenue and have built a pathway to justice when none has existed at the international or national level in Syria or at the ICC to do the same thing in the Ukraine context. So as I say, there are all sorts of areas I think that we can cooperate to achieve justice in the situation of Ukraine and Syria together and send a message that there will be no impunity for these crimes.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. There are lots of things to talk and discuss when I'm starting questioning. I would like to go to Mr. Ibrahim Ulabi, Chief Legal Counsel, the Reckoning Project. He is virtual and he is joining us by Zoom. The floor is yours, Mr. Ibrahim Ulabi. You have the floor for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's very encouraging to be again part of an esteemed panel and conference that discusses this about how we can come together to fight impunity. I perhaps, just a little bit of background in terms of my relationship to both Syria and Ukraine. So my week is kind of split in half. Half of my week I am the Chief Legal Counsel for the Reckoning Project, which works solely on Ukraine, engaging with different international courts and mechanisms domestically and internationally. And my other half of the week is working on Syria. And I'm glad to find events and opportunities to kind of bring these two files together. And just in terms of a couple of opening kind of thoughts around accountability, between Syria and Ukraine, I think the first side of holding perpetrators to account is the people that they think they are oppressing or that they can oppress coming together, regardless of what they achieve. The mere idea that people are gathered here in this room and in different events previously over the last couple of months to show solidarity with one another is in a way holding Russia to account, because its quote-unquote success stories in Syria are not holding, and quote-unquote success stories in Ukraine are not holding either. And the complete opposite is happening. People are coming together. It is triggering a wider fight than just what Russia thought would happen in Ukraine. So the mere solidarity, the mere experience sharing, the mere willing of different groups to mention other crimes committed far away from them because the perpetrator is the same and the pain is the same and the policy is the same, in my opinion, is already a form of holding perpetrators and Russia in particular as that kind of perpetrator to account. The other side, and I think that's linked to us Syrians a little bit more in what we can do, is, as you know, when Ukraine started, a lot of people who did not want to work on Ukraine were using the world's inaction on Syria as an excuse. They're saying, oh, why is the world caring about Ukraine and not caring about Syria? And I think a lot of us Syrians came to the forefront and say, do not use us as an excuse to not do work on Ukraine. We want you to do work on Ukraine. We would be happy for Ukraine in the same way that it's the battlefield for the peace and security of Europe and perhaps the world, for it to be the battlefield of the fight against impunity. So over and over in international meetings where, countries that are on the fence or want to be on the fence are saying, why all of this on Ukraine and not on Syria, there has been instrumental Syrian voices that I'm proud to be one of them, saying, do not use me as an excuse for not to act in that context. The third point that I think is absolutely key is, while some of my colleagues have mentioned that there are jurisdictional challenges just because the world is kind of organized into kind of territorial jurisdiction more than anything else, in that sense, making it difficult to bring Russia's crimes between Chechnya, Syria, Georgia, and Ukraine all together under kind of different avenues. there are ways of us coming together when it's Russia focused. So, when Russia had its Universal Periodic Review, I was proud that the Reckoning Project did the submission there. I'm going to Geneva later this week on Russia's review of its treaty obligations under the Treaty for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And the whole idea there is whenever we are talking about Russia, we can bring the different conflicts together that Russia is party to. So that's in many international forums, whether it's before the Human Rights Council or treaty bodies, or different kind of UN special procedures. And the key element here is not to make it about Ukraine or make it about Syria or make it about Chechnya or make it about Georgia, but to prove that the crimes that Russia is committing in Ukraine and trying to hide them, to say, no, that this is a policy. And here we are having so many different people from different conflicts saying that these are not isolated incidents, or this is not just Western propaganda, or this is not just a one-off thing that we're having to do a special operation. We are here as Syrians, as Chechens, as Georgians, to put our pain and suffering and our trauma on the table to prove the propensity and the likelihood of the allegations that Russia is trying to avoid. So in shaping the narrative is a form of holding Russia to account by saying this is not the first time that you have done this and that you have done it somewhere else. We're also holding Russia to account by coming together and that mere act. And whenever we are in international forums, to be able to show together that, bring our evidence together, bring our, the policies that we all experience together in order to make the case against Russia. All of that should, in my opinion, be ongoing until we find a stronger or clearer avenues to kind of invoke individual criminal responsibility for individuals or state responsibility in more kind of international court sense, that can bring the different jurisdictions and conflicts together. But I think that at least as a starting point, and I'm very happy that there are now organizations forming, there are networks forming, there are meetings happening, there are trips that are taking place to send Putin a message that you think if you are selling that you have won in these different conflicts, you have not, and we are here again to show that we are in full solidarity with the people of Ukraine and fighting together against impunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ibrahim Ulabi. Before going to my last panelist, Mr. Ivan Nelson, I would like to mention that in Afghanistan, we had the experience of the Soviet Union occupation during the 80s. And during that decade of the 14 years of the communist regime in Afghanistan, with the support of Soviet Union, 1 million Afghans lost their lives or killed during the conflict, during the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. And 3 million people were forced to leave the country to the neighboring states or to the neighboring countries or to other countries. So Mr. Ivan Nelson, former Danish representative for Syrian crisis, I would like to start your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all of you. Sitting here, I can see the title of the conference here, Justice and Accountability, New Ways of Thinking. And I think let me actually start out by saying it's actually sad that we have to think of new ways of thinking, because this should be easy peasy. This is about stop killing people, civilians, stop committing war crimes, uphold international law, uphold the rule-based international order, and if you don't do it, you face the music, face sanctions, you have to be held accountable. It's as simple as that. However, we know the world and the reality looks quite differently, and that's why we're discussing it today, and for sure we need to find new ways of thinking, because the way we think, not us in this room, but the wider context out there are thinking right now is not working. I would not say at all, because I'm not disregarding the efforts that both Fadel and Stephen mentioned. The ICJ in The Hague is a commendable step in pursuit of accountability. It's very commendable that national courts have taken up a number of cases leading to conviction, etc. But I think we also all agree that that is, while commendable and should be supported, and more on that, it is only the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds, if not thousands out there that needs to be similarly held accountable for gross human rights violations, if not war crimes or crimes against humanity. But why is it then that we are discussing it? And I want to approach it a bit more from a political perspective, without politicizing the accountability file. Because, well, in a simple one-liner, the Security Council has become more and more paralyzed. We know why. We have certain countries with a veto-holding authority, and as Fadel pointed out, in particular one, Russia, has used that veto repeatedly in the case of Syria and elsewhere, and has basically, in recent times, ensured that there's absolutely a blockage to the pursuit of accountability, and even on some very, very basic matters on providing humanitarian assistance, which we'll discuss later this afternoon. So that mechanism is not fit for purpose right now. Whether it will be is a broader discussion. Whether we also need to rethink that is a broader discussion. Then against that reality, what we have seen, and some of the commendable steps have actually been taken by the General Assembly, where somewhat they have, using their authority, their power, they have established, for instance, the independent investigative mechanism for Syria. They have now also recently established a new commission for the missing people, etc. We have the Human Rights Council that have established the Commission of Inquiry in the case of Syria. So these mechanisms have been established. But if I'm to be a bit cynical, while that is all commendable and we should definitely support and more of that, they don't have teeth because that's the limitations of the international system is right now. We lack teeth. We lack big teeth because only teeth is actually the way, in my view, where we can somewhat genuinely, let's say, fight impunity and realize accountability, not only pursue accountability, because at the end of the day, accountability is only seen if we bring it to a conclusion where somebody, the perpetrators, the war criminals and others face the music. It's not enough about the process, it's not enough about a recommendation, it's not enough about documenting, it's not enough about reporting. We need to go to the next step if we are to be successful in actually winning this battle. And why is it so important to win the battle of accountability and fighting impunity? And that's where I want to turn a bit more from a political angle, and that is we collectively, and that's where I think there's a massive potential in Ukrainian and Syrian accountability champions joining hands and working together. We need to put more pressure on the international world, the international community, because we need more political backing to this fight as well. We need to convince, we need to compel politicians around the world to realize the one-liner that the importance of fighting impunity, the importance of achieving accountability is not only because it's the right thing to do, it is simply that these are the root causes of conflicts and wars. And the bottom line is, if you don't address the root causes, if you don't eliminate the root causes, the world, certain regions more than others in the short term, but the world will continue to see instability, war, and conflict. And I think the time has come where the politicians also have to increasingly take responsibility for that. I think politicians, when it comes to war and conflict, yet again, we cannot compare context, obviously, but politicians, I think recent times have shown that it's more within the comfort zone of politicians to address and somewhat mitigate the symptoms of conflicts and wars. You know, it's easier for politicians to provide humanitarian assistance. It's a bit more difficult for them to really go in forcefully and talk about accountability and impunity. And I think what I would like to see going forward, and I see a lot of potential here in, let's say, joining Ukrainian and Syrian accountability voices in actually spearheading a global campaign, a solidarity movement, sadly enough against a sad, let's say, background, because both Syrians and Ukrainians have felt the brunt of this, with the common aggressor and perpetrator being Russia. So you speak with the voice nobody else can do in the world. And I think
I will end there, Sandhya, for now. I think going forward, that's something we should explore ways and means to somewhat instill and build upon. And then I think if Ukrainians and Syrians are successful, as you are already now here with this conference and elsewhere, then others in the world, I'm sure, will love to join hands with you and join your voice so that we have a global, let's say, campaign in favor of accountability and fighting impunity. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ivan. I would like to start with a question from all of you. With the ongoing genocide and war in Ukraine by Russian and conflict in Syria, and there are many other conflicts going on around the world, for example, in Israel and Gaza, what are the measures, what are the measures to reduce the risk that the rule-based international laws and order do not collapse further? Ambassador Arab, I will start with you.
Well, I think it's important to note that our experience with tribunals in the post-Cold War period is that it's not enough simply to have a court. It's not enough to have arrest warrants. It's not enough to have investigations open. You need to really build a coalition of countries that's committed to support that process. Support it, one, in gathering necessary evidence, which many times can require, as it did in the Yugoslavia Tribunal, the sharing of satellite photos and intercepts and other things that clearly connect high-level commanders to some of the bad things that are happening on the ground. I prosecuted cases in international courts. About 3/4 of our cases at the Rwanda Tribunal, we ended up with convictions. A quarter, we had acquittals. At the ICC, to be frank, in 20 years, they've convicted 5 non-state actors. They've lost the leadership of Kenya case. They've lost the leadership of Ivory Coast case. They've lost the case against Vice President Bemba of the DRC, et cetera. And it was often because of the absence of evidence. And you really do need to build that evidence. Now, one of the things that the lessons that's been learned, in fact, out of Syria, is that with civil society and people that were actually there at the scene of the crime, bringing out the documentation and working with them, you can build that evidence a whole lot better than a bunch of internationals can coming along a dozen years later. By that time, it's been buried. By that time, it's hidden, et cetera. So you've got, those organizations need support. They need funding. They need constant, and it's challenging to continue that. But you've got groups like the Truth Hounds here that have obviously provided this enormous, information on the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, and not just the dangers that we all know that center presents, but also the torture that's going on there. That's important. But states need to support it, and then to get the arrests. I mean, how is it that these courts got the arrests? I mean, if you look at the Yugoslavia court, they had other states in Europe and the rest of the world saying, we're not going to let the sanctions go off, Serbia, for instance, until there's cooperation. And that led to the surrender of Milosevic. When he was indicted in May of 1999 during the Kosovo operation, most people thought, well, that's a pipe dream. He's the president of Yugoslavia. Who's going to get him? Within 15 months, he couldn't steal enough votes to stay in power. He was succeeded by another nationalist, albeit not by a war criminal. And within 9 months after that, because of states banding together and saying, we're not going to lift sanctions, we're not going to take positive action towards Serbia unless we get cooperation, he was surrendered to The Hague. Later on, getting the other war criminals, which included not just Serbs, but also Croatian war criminals and others involved, it needed this conditionality. The countries couldn't move forward into the European Union, even into the Stability Pact. It's a sort of anteroom of the EU, unless there was full and complete cooperation. And that was so clear and presented uniformly by the states of the European Union that eventually all 161 persons charged by the ICTY were brought to justice. I mean, there were some cases that were transferred, there were some cases that were dismissed, but every single case was resolved. I mean, but it was an example of states banding together. And so by the same token here, in the context of the Putin warrant and the Maria Lvova-Belova warrant, you need states saying, we're not going to eliminate the sanctions in the EU or in the US or in Canada or Britain or elsewhere until there's cooperation. There's not going to be any unfreezing of assets until we have cooperation. So you've got to have that clear messaging sent. And there needs to be the same messaging sent when it comes to justice, where countries have even in third countries, where they have done a proper job of investigation, where the evidence is abundant, where there should be no doubt that justice needs to be done, then states should clearly send the signal. If that perpetrator shows up on our territory, we're going to cooperate with that state. And that was one of the positive things that happened this last summer. I mean, it's more legal, but in Ljubljana, there was a conference of nations, about 78 were there, that signed a mutual assistance treaty so that they will assist and extradite suspects that are charged, not just with drug crimes and terrorism crimes, but now also with international crimes, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression. So you need that level of state support. It's not enough just to have the warrants. You need that support to build the evidence and obtain the cooperation. And each state, that should be a demand on them. I mean, what are you doing beyond joining a court or ratifying a treaty? What are you doing to actually make it happen? And how high in the priorities of your state is this fight for justice? That and it's not excuse me, it's not easy, because every state has interests, it has trade, it has economic questions, it has questions of what the price of grain is for their farmers, as we know. I mean, these issues are out there, but you need to elevate this priority, and it needs to be a key part of meetings of the G7 and the G20 and other groupings of states to say, we put justice and accountability for these atrocity crimes at the top of the list of priorities.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I believe that Mr. Ulabi wants to leave at 1:15. Mr. Ulabi, do you have something to add about the question that I asked?
Yes, I do, and it's definitely, I don't want to leave. I have to leave. I would really wish to stay all day with you here. But perhaps just very briefly about how not to undermine the world order further. And I think let's look at it from Russia's perspective, right? So let's look at what Russia tries to do to undermine or to call out the undermining of the international world order. And the number one thing that they do is to invoke this concept of whataboutism. Whataboutery. What about this conflict? What about Iraq? What about Afghanistan with the Western presence? What about Israel and Palestine at the moment? What about Ethiopia? You remember there was a very early video about with Lavrov saying when you can't sleep about Ukraine, I want you to explain to kind of imagine that this was the Middle East and this was Israel, Palestine, or something along these lines. So the same economic and political interests that Ambassador Rapp was talking about, I think it is absolutely key for governments, to think very carefully before they apply one standard to one situation and another standard in another situation. And when that happens, to really kind of push in the other direction to the extent possible. I mean, we've seen the videos coming out from the ICC about the ongoing situation, asking for resources in order to be able to look into crimes that Hamas militants have committed into Israel, and that Israel is allegedly committing in Gaza. But when the ICC is unable to look into this and does not receive the same referral request to look into the conflict there, or the same funding to look into the conflict there, it already gave Russia a lot of limelight and green light. And we've seen Putin nonstop going around and speaking and saying look at the double standards. The same is across conflicts, the conflicts in Libya, the conflicts in Yemen, and so on and so forth. So I think it is absolutely key, because in our international order to be able to get states to, as much as possibly, and again, there are domestic and international politics at play there, to really uphold the same norms that they agreed for them to be binding norms. When people reference the different conventions or the Rome Statute, these were not put by victims of one conflict with the other. These were put by states, and states need to do their far best to be able to do that. And we're happy that now we're seeing a shift in that in the language, and we're seeing more kind of international law centered language in the variety of conflicts ongoing in our region. So I think that would be kind of one way, in order not to undermine and to not increase the politicization of justice, because it also impacts the credibility of civil society organizations that are funded or supported by one government or the other. To say, but your government didn't do that in Iraq or did that in Afghanistan or turned a blind eye here or a blind eye there. Then our objectivity in being able to kind of support, which is our perceived objectivity, not just the objectivity, but the perceived objectivity, which is as important as actually being objective in the work, is undermined in that sense. So upholding the principles that a lot of governments have held themselves to kind of to that standard is absolutely key, and supporting civil society organizations in a way that is without interference, without undermining their work, I think is also absolutely key in order for organizations to be seen as credible documenters, credible voices in standing against the aggression that is happening in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Thank you so much, Mr. Olobi, and thanks for joining us virtually. I wish you all the best, and I wish you the best for your struggle for justice and freedom. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Ghany?
Yes, sure. This is a very interesting question, and I love to add something. I can't agree more with my colleague Ivan and my colleague and friend as well. And there is and I think we need to address that not only legally. I have LLM, and but also politically. It's mainly about will, and they are linked actually, and they are genuinely linked because. Here we are noticing that regarding your question, I think there is a lack of will, political will, and lack to following their obligations, because based on law, states, they have obligations to fight crimes against humanity and to fight war crimes. And that's very obvious. Geneva I Convention, Article 1. All states should implement and assure implementation by all measures. And that's very clear. And they didn't do that in Ukraine, in Syria, in everywhere. So they don't want actually, as my colleague Evan said, it's easier, okay, provide a humanitarian. But accountability and willing to take step toward that, it's need more political effort. It's need engagement, it need all of that. But the easiest thing and the easier is supporting immunity, supporting humanitarian issue. Also ICJ, I refer to ICJ and I consider that, okay, a major success. Okay, thanks for Netherlands and Canadian, but it's also a very late steps. How about I advocated for other states to take similar steps in ICTJ? The Assad regime violated other convention, Children Convention, Women Convention, CEDAW. None of them respond to move to ICTJ, same what the Canadian and the Netherlands did. Even the universal jurisdiction. These are very minor achievements. We reviewed all of the verdicts, the sentence, from all states who is engaged in the universal jurisdiction in Syria. And we'll issue a report about that. Only 29 sentences. Out of those 29, 26 against non-state actors. 26, out of those 26, approximately 24 accusing terrorism. It's very easy to charge or to issue a sentence against the terrorist group engaging in terrorism. Okay. Furthermore, all of those, I'm just highlighting and assuring in example what my colleague Evan said, sanctions, which is also should be easier. And sanction is one way to fight impunity. Fighting impunity and achieving accountability, it's not only by court, by jurisdiction. It should be by all measures, including sanction, including political will, including pressure, including pushing toward achieve a political process, all of that. Let me refer to the sanction. Sanction against Assad regime. I mentioned 0 sanction against Russia. After all of crimes against humanity, war crimes in Syria, 0 at all. On contrary, there is a military cooperation, a military exhibition in Europe after their crimes and attacking hospitals in Syria. Sanction against Assad itself. It's like being raised, and it might be little bit affected Assad in 2014, not before that. So movement toward accountability, it's need actually a clear steps, and it should be like behind it a political will. Otherwise, it will never be succeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghany. Mr. Ivan, I would like to ask you a question in addition to what I asked. There are some examples that there has been some justice for people. For example, Ambassador Rapp mentioned the case in Sweden or some other cases. There was another case about a criminal of the Soviet supported regime in Afghanistan in Netherlands. But there are many of those criminals walking freely on the streets of Western capitals with money and with impunity. What are the ways to bring them to justice and to make them accountable for what they did in their own countries or against others, other people in other countries?
Thank you. I think this is also what I referred to before, that obviously commending the efforts we have seen. For me, they're only the tip of the iceberg because it is limited to a fairly small number. I'm looking at the real expert here, Stephen and Fadel. I guess in successful convictions by national courts are still only 10, 20 on the Syria file or something like that. And we all know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of gross human rights violators, if not war crimes out there, still avoiding accountability. And some of which are for sure outside Syria, where they are a bit untouchable, sadly enough, at least for now. And I think obviously the onus would be on also national authorities to follow that closely, but we also know that it is an environment where it is incredibly difficult to, or it appears to be difficult to establish that their involvement in these cases, because obviously you also have to be loyal to another fundamental principle, the rule of law and the burden of proof, etc. But that brings me to saying that the very commendable efforts by, in the case of Syria, Syrian civil society organizations in documenting, reporting, making information available, both to national authorities where it's applicable, but also the let's say the 2 or 3 UN established institutions like the Commission of Inquiry, the IIIM I referred to before, and even now the newly established Commission for the Missing People. So I think that is the way forward. But that also leads me to say, just coming back to one of your earlier questions, I think as we hopefully are more successful in pursuing the political will, also as reiterated by Fadel, by highlighting that we simply need to get this more right, because otherwise we are in for more instability, conflict, if not war. As in parallel with that, it is immensely important, and perhaps it's even more important, that we support and resource the documentation of the crimes being committed. Obviously by Syrian civil society organizations as well as Ukrainian institutions. And they deserve even more support at all calibers, financial support, political support, technical support, because we need to prepare for the day, if we are successful on more political will, to really be honest on pushing back on impunity and realize accountability. All of that documentation, the evidence, or whatever we call it, comes in as essential parts of then really bringing the culprits to real justice. Not only a process, but to real justice. And that you can, by way of comparison, say that would be a conviction by a national court, because they are facing real justice. Those processes, following due process, compliant with rule of law, full-fledged from A to Z, they are now being sentenced to, in many cases, prison terms. And that is obviously the ultimate, let's say, realization of accountability for their crimes. I don't want to take more time now, because also I think if Alexander's video is available, for sure we should allow that to be played. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, let's go and watch. The video is not available yet? Okay. So about the common experience of Syria and Ukraine in documentation of the crimes against humanity and the crimes against humanity, what common or joint projects are going on between Syria and Ukraine in efforts to document all the crimes for maybe later when there is willingness to investigate and bring those responsible for justice?
Thanks for the question. And I think that our duty toward the Ukrainian organization to share our experience. We are like coming from an awful conflict, which we subjected to tremendous different types of violations, shelling, displacement, killing, and I think that Ukrainian is facing the same. It's worth to share our experience, how we document, how we build this database, how we archive, how we produce a report. And that also, based on that, we can move ahead and build mutual cases together. That's why I refer to a meeting with the General Prosecutor today. I think that we can, but like talking about my organization, we build a database, and Ukrainian are like interested in this sharing information, because similar officers, Russian officers, attack Syria, some of them being shifted to attack Ukraine. And they conducted a similar strategy, which is they do it before in Syria. So that we are noticing here in Ukraine attacking vital facilities like hospitals, schools, regardless of consequences. And when they invaded, also we also noticed a lot of rape, a lot of similar violations being committed in Syria. So what I want to say that there is a mutual ground between the similarity, and I think based on that we can enhance each other information. So it's not only one direction. I'm also requesting an information from the prosecutor as well, so we can as well publish a report or announce what officers' information we got from Ukraine as well. And we know that a lot of Russian companies, for example, are engaged in breaking the sanction against Assad. So I think there is a lot of space, a lot of room to cooperate in documentation and in reporting about and revealing the perpetrator in Russia and in Syria as well. Wagner, Olga referred to that. It's one also a mutual space we can work to reveal Wagner violations in Syria. As well, we need to follow what they committed, and it can be a build, if not a case, maybe at least a joint report. I think it's worth to have and to see this fruitful network showing a joint report by Syrian and Ukrainian human rights organization.
Thank you so much. Before going to you, Mr. Ambassador, I would like to ask another question in addition to what I asked. Due to this complexity of the justice system, the international laws and regulations, this documentation of these crimes and making reports requires knowledge and professionalism. What are the resources available for the people, for the organization, for example, in Syria and Ukraine, in other places, in Afghanistan? We are right now facing gender apartheid. And we need the resources and the knowledge and the training to document all those evidence. What kind of resources are available, or what's your advice to the organization to do what to make those documentations or those evidence more professional and according to the rules and the regulations?
Well, excuse me, that's an excellent question. The Syrian case, I think, represents a place where that was done. Now, that to some extent was because there was an absence of ICC, there was an absence of domestic processes, and even though we had initially a commission of inquiry, its mandate was to issue a 23-page report every 6 months on various things that were happening, but not really to work with civil society, not really to engage in the collection of physical documents or videos or other information. So in 2012, a number of countries that were then the Friends of the Syrian People launched what was essentially SJAC, the Syrian Justice and Accountability Center, which still exists. But the vision was that that would be a hub that would then work with various civil society organizations to build their skills and to begin to document the crimes that were happening in Syria. And groups like Fadel's Syrian Network for Human Rights benefited from that and became the sort of go-to place that would really document the numbers of missing, the numbers of physical violations and everything that were happening in various places that were being committed by the regime and other actors. The Syrian Archive, media archive basically, became an organization called Menomic, but they focused on the millions of videos that are out there of the crimes that were being committed and ways in which those videos could be verified and the deep fakes taken out and corroboration could be obtained. I'm involved in another organization that I joined after I left the State Department called CIJA, the Commission for International Justice and Accountability, and its niche was the linkage evidence to a large extent. Understand that in most situations that we've had at international level where we've had atrocities, there's bloody murder, there's horrible cases of victimization. There's no question that the crime is committed. But as I said, in many of the tribunals, when then it was necessary to prove that this president or this general was responsible, there was a failure of proof to directly connect him to those crimes. And so CIJA began working essentially with the Syrians and employed them who were on the ground. And particularly in places where the government lost the Syrian government lost control, they abandoned hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. And working with those groups, CIJA brought out more than 1,200,000 documents. And these documents eventually fully analyzed and allowed the development of a database of about 4 million names. So it was possible to put in a name and see where that person turned up in the documents, both perpetrators and victims, to such an extent that we see the orders given from the top of the regime. We see the security committees and the popular committees that are organized in order to engage in this process of eventually sweeping up some 200,000 people at least and sending them into these crowded dungeons where tens of thousands didn't survive, as we see in the Caesar photos, others who were forced into false confessions and then hanged in places like Sidnaya. So then it was possible to go to a place like the trial in Germany and say, here is Unit 251, and here is Roslin, and here are the orders that came down, and here is what they did, and here are the Caesar photos, which show 404 photos of people taken who were killed in that facility, and their bodies were then taken to military hospitals, et cetera. So that kind of connection was put together. Now, CIJA in particular is now working here with authorities on a similar challenge, because we do, excuse me for the cough, excuse me, we do have this situation where documents have been obtained on the field of battle, particularly in those places where the Russian forces have withdrawn, as we did north of Kyiv and Busha and elsewhere relatively early in the conflict, later last year with the successful counteroffensive in the Kharkiv area, et cetera. Of course, we see from those places the horrendous crimes, the survivors, the corpses, and everything else. But there were also tens of thousands of pages of documents that were left behind. Now, obviously, the military had great use for those documents because they have the need to operate safely, to know who they're dealing with, to get as much intel as they can for an operational standpoint. But there's largely been a disconnect between the military and the justice system, between military intelligence and its priority and the justice system. So now we're actually engaged in a process of digitizing those documents and working with local authorities and others to bring that information in, as it can tell us about the chain of command, about the units that were involved, about the orders that were given. It's not quite as extensive as it was in the Syrian context, because there you actually had the city of Aleppo, and you had the headquarters of military intelligence and the headquarters of Air Force intelligence, and they left tens of thousands of pages of documents describing what they were doing, many of which duplicated and sent out to different organizations where there are different people signing and saying they're part of it. But here there's still a lot of that, and working with other groups to bring in that kind of information that can really help you in the international legal context, show who's responsible. In the we'll talk more about it this afternoon, but in international law, we have the advantage of the doctrine of command responsibility, which holds that, and it comes from Nuremberg, it's in the statute of all of the international tribunals. It says that a commander, even a political leader, who's in effective control of the people below him, who has knowledge of what they're doing, or has reason to know what they're doing, and then fails to take action to prevent these war crimes, or to punish them afterwards, is legally responsible for those crimes in the same way as if they had done it themselves or put in a direct order. And that's been very useful in places where you're dealing with regular units. It's much more complicated when you're dealing with irregulars, as we have sometimes in the Syrian context, Shabia and others, or like we had in Rwanda, the Interahamwe militia, et cetera. Sometimes they're the ones that do the nasty work, and the leaders say, oh, we had nothing to do with them, they're out of control. But here you have that advantage. On the other hand, in the Ukrainian system, there's no command responsibility. So there you need the more direct evidence of the ordering. And thus far, as you look at the cases that have been preceded, like the case against the 21-year-old who was charged for shooting the 62-year-old off the bicycle in Busha, that's a direct perpetration case. This guy shot this individual, et cetera. We need to be able to have the orders, to have the structure and those communications that allow us to charge the colonel or the general, et cetera, who sent that individual into that situation, and the sort of direction that he provided to them about these sorts of things in order to hold that individual responsible. So that's, that kind of work needs to be done. Now, one of the positive things that's happened in the Syrian context since is there's been the establishment of this mechanism, this independent mechanism. It has a whole program, and I mean, Fadel can speak to it, I mean, at the Lausanne platform, that works directly with civil society organizations, works on training them, making sure they have those skills, and also enters into formal memorandum of understanding with each group in which groups actually get notice if their information is being used, which is the opposite of the usual rule, which is just send the information, you never find out a thing. So there are some things that are being done in the Syrian context that should be replicated here, I think, that can help further the process of holding the really responsible individuals to account.
Thank you very much. For the sake of keeping the time of this panel, I think we're over time. But I would like to ask Ambassador Ivan Nelson about his experience and about his expectations in establishing maybe an international institution for collecting, analyzing, and documenting the atrocities of war crimes, war against humanity, crime against humanity, gender apartheid, or similar other atrocities, mass atrocities. Is there any way to establish maybe an international professional institution for documenting and analyzing and collecting the evidence? Because we are also in this era of technology and this information revolution. We are also facing some disinformation, fake news, and issues like deep fake, as mentioned by Ambassador Raab.
Thank you. I think it's one of those where some would somewhat look at what they would say is the geopolitical reality right now and the international architecture, and then they would conclude that no, that's not possible because we have the Security Council with all its, let's say, paralysis right now. I believe in the principle that instead of actually just stopping short at saying what we cannot do, let's zoom in on what we can do. And I think steps towards that, it is by no means perfect because we still need to address those overall, let's say, geopolitical and multilateral structural problems we are facing right now. But what prevents coalitions of countries to advance the agenda among themselves first on some topical issues like perhaps chemical weapons or even war crimes or crimes against humanity, and then let that somewhat see. And if we accept the potential in getting the ball rolling, we may get to a point where somewhat the political will increase, because we need that political will. That is essential for this to succeed at all. So we can simply not ignore that bit and just look at legality, formal limitations, formal, let's say, setups and the like. We need the political will to be the fuel that can somewhat get this not only engine going, but also accelerating over time. So I can only encourage that the policymakers who acknowledge and accept somewhat the analysis we have put out here today becomes more genuine, more honest in supporting genuine efforts towards accountability and fighting impunity.
And can I just add, there is a movement to do that. I mean, there is a movement to create a standing investigative mechanism with a broad mandate. I mean, it's challenging because different countries want to focus on one thing or another, and we're dealing in situations like Syria and Ukraine where there are processes, where there is a IIM for Syria, and of course there is an ICC case and domestic prosecutions in the case of Ukraine. Not enough, but you're dealing with other situations as well. And so the idea of creating a standing investigative mechanism that could build evidence, work with civil society in a variety of places is out there. But it will be an issue of political will because, countries can unify and say, well, do it over here, yeah, okay. We'll do it over here, okay. Well, we don't know about this one, and we don't know about this one, et cetera. And we need to make this a more uniform situation, and we have these yawning accountability gaps, which open us to these double standard kind of arguments that the opponents use.
Thank you very much. My question was actually because we see the examples that, for example, Russia is using non-state actors for their crimes. Wagner is one of the examples, but there are many non-state actors supported and financed by Russia to do the crimes and to escape justice. What's your closing remarks about this, Mr. Ghany?
I think it's not that much difficult to link Wagner with the structure of the Russian regime. It's very much obvious. They are holding Russian nationalities. They are not being following by the Russian authorities in spite of their existence and their involvement in crimes against humanity and war crimes in many countries. The Russian government responsibility is to follow the Wagner group inside Russia. They have to, based on their obligation in international law. But they didn't. If they didn't, or prevent Russia Wagner, so that means their involvement in those crimes. And there is like lots of links between Russian authorities and Wagner group. A lot of evidence refer to that. So I think that we can say that what crimes or violations being committed by Wagner group, the Russian government or the Russian regime holding at the same time the same responsibility, and their involvement is obvious in those crimes.
Thank you very much. I would like to conclude this session by thanking all the panelists and the organizer. And thank you for listening and paying attention to those all important points that was mentioned by the panelists. And I hope that we have the justice and accountability for all the victims of mass atrocities and crimes against humanity. Thank you so much.
Just a quick note, thank you everyone. Our next panel is at 3, and I don't even think I need this. It's at 3 p.m. and we're gonna break for a quick break, lunch, and then be back at 3 for the next panel. Thank you.